Thanks for tuning in to Discover Stories on Reimagine Radio. Before we get started, here's a word from our sponsor.
Do you wish you had a voice in making some of the world's most popular websites more accessible? Fable is recruiting a community of paid assistive technology users who work from home to test websites and provide feedback on how they can be improved. We're currently recruiting testers who use Dragon, voice control, eye tracking, switch controls, and head mice. No resume, no cover letter, and no experience with user testing is required. Learn more and apply at www.makeitfable.com/community.
So for our audience, could you explain your role as a CBC web writer?
Sure. So I was hired by CBC 7.5 years ago as a web writer. And since then, my job has sort of evolved where I'm the municipal affairs reporter for CBC Vancouver. And that means basically I cover local politics. So city halls, mayors, councillors, rezonings, all that sort of stuff, from the biggest cities, Vancouver and Victoria, to when small things are happening, even the smallest, like Little Zabalas, which has just 140 or so people on the west side of Vancouver Island. So I report on that, and I do so for online, for web stories that you read at cbc.ca/BC, for radio if you're listening in your car, whether a news story or where I'm talking to a host for 7 or 8 minutes at a time, on TV as well, and then on TikTok, Instagram, the website formerly known as Twitter, anywhere that people are, you try and reach out and tell people stories about what's happening in municipal politics in this province that they should know about.
And why do you feel that your role as a municipal affairs reporter is especially important? Because like I mentioned in the earlier attempt, we have federal reporters, we have provincial political reporters, but why do you think it's important to have municipal affairs covered as well, and how often do you think that gets overlooked compared to the other two levels of government?
Well, it's one of those difficulties of just the very nature of local politics, right? Where we have one federal government, so one place that you can go to report on it, on Parliament Hill in Ottawa, and so we have more than 100 people there. In provincial politics, there's 10 provinces, and all of them have plenty of people there as well. Not 100, obviously, but people from, every large station. But in BC, we have 160 different municipalities. And there's just not the resources available to make sure that there are dedicated reporters in each and every one of those city halls. So, number one, I find it important and a responsibility to take seriously, just because there's a lot less people doing it. And it's a place where a lot less stories get covered than on a provincial or federal basis, simply because there's less people around. But the second part is just the things that you're dealing with, right? Municipal nerds and mayors and councillors like to say that local politics, it's the form of government closest to the people. Federal political issues, defense, environment, the economy, they're very broad and they affect everyone, but in a very disparate way most of the time. Provincial politics, more direct, schools, hospitals, and so forth, but there still is that distance there. It's these hub activities. Local politics is very granular. It's literally what's happening on the land next to you, whether a building can be 2 stories or 4 stories or 10 stories, whether a park is going to be renovated or sold or staying as is or expanded, how the police is operating, and the priorities that council is trying to put on them or not. So it's all this stuff that is really close to how people live and directly affects them in a way that I think is really important and interesting to be able to be at the ground level and see and tell people what's happened and how that will directly impact their lives.
Awesome. So what was your experience like growing up with autism until you finished post-secondary education?
So it was interesting, and it's a little bit of a complicated story, but it's important to give context for folks. So when I was, 2, 3, 4 years old, and my parents took me to a lot of doctors to try and figure out, why I was, quote, different. And there were some things that I could do very well, and other things that I had challenges with relative to kids my age. And at the time, my symptoms were thought of by doctors as, not autism, but something that was being, explored, known as Asperger's. But at the time, that still wasn't a clinical diagnosis. That didn't come until I was about 6 or 7 years old. So when I went through this as a kid, the doctor said, well, this is sort of what it is, and this is what this is how we're starting to understand it as part of this wider spectrum. But we don't have a formal diagnosis yet. But so my parents, raised me and put me into programs and to opportunities that, were adjacent to sort of programs explicitly meant for autistic children. Lots of hand-eye coordination, speech therapy, to fine motor skills, and so forth. But without me knowing. For their own perfectly defensible reasons, they didn't tell me about the conversations they had and the way that they were, informed to raise me until I was in university. So growing up, I knew I was, different than the other kids, and I knew that there were, some things, I could memorize textbooks and be the best at spelling and chess and figuring out the transit system for Greater Victoria and knowing all of the stats for the 1996 Seattle Mariners in baseball. But could I pronounce words or, make friends as easily as the other kids in school, or understand when a teacher was particularly angry with me because I was, prattling on and on about something I found interesting?
Yeah.
No, I didn't, and so sometimes that caused difficulty. But I managed the best that I could, and was a happy kid, and was well raised, and had enough of a support group around me. My first couple of years of university were a bit of a challenge, not knowing, because suddenly there's a whole bunch of new things that you're learning all at the same time, and new ways that you're realizing that you're doing things differently or figuring things out at a different step than other people. And it was during university that my parents told me, hey, this is, what we did when you were a kid. And when my mom said, you have autism, I describe it as sort of the longest blink in my life, where I just sort of like, I closed my eyes for a second. I thought about my entire life and just, and it's like, oh, all of these things and questions I have immediately make more sense now with that as a diagnosis, or with that guiding them. And so I went, oh, yeah, okay, a lot of these questions make more sense now. This is helpful and good, and now I can build a better structure for understanding certain things about myself and the places that, and situations that I thrive, and the ones that I have some discomfort. So the answer to your question, is like it was a bunch of different steps, right? Such that by the time I got out of university, I had a pretty good grounding and understanding of who I was and how being autistic, impacted the way that I lived my life and interacted with people, and the opportunities and challenges it gave me relative to other folks in terms of going through the same things that we all have to go through as humans.
And would you be okay describing a little more of some of the challenges you faced interacting with other people in school, or is that something you'd rather?
Sure. No, I mean, it's one of those things where, you...
Or just interacting with people, or just when compared to everyone else.
Like, the classic sort of one is like making friends, right? And it was,
Oh yeah.
And I or just sort of naturally getting along with people better. And I was always, struck as a kid going, it's like, oh, they're able to bond so quickly. Whereas I feel this sort of like emotional distance where I can't figure them out quite as quick, or I'll say something and they'll sort of react awkwardly. And why is that? Whereas for, neurotypical people, you sort of figure that out intuitively, right?
Yeah,
You're on the same wavelength. Whereas for me, I sort of had to like reverse engineer, where it's like, all right, what like to do? They like funny people. The funny people have lots of friends, so I'm going to try and figure out
Trying
humor.
to fit in.
Figure out humor. Like, and so when I would be watching, sitcoms, Seinfeld or News Radio or Friends or whatever, I would go, oh, like that's a way that you can be funny, or that's a way. And so, I would do things like that, right? Or when people are annoyed with you, right? And you're trying to figure out why is that? And this was one that I struggled more with before, learning I was autistic. And then you search for symptoms, and then autistic people often like to sort of have tunnel vision, talking about their own interests and centering
I've had that issue too.
Things back. And so once I learned that, it's like, oh, so maybe if some of those times where when I just go on for 4 minutes about the thing that I find interesting, I look up, after a minute and try and read their face. And if they're not engaged, move on, right? Or wrap up the story, or try and relate it to them, right? Which does not come naturally. So you have to overthink and sort of build up that database in your brain in order to make those interactions work better, or at least that's been my strategy.
I see. And you mentioned earlier that your parents didn't tell you you had autism until you were in
university.
University. Would it be okay if I asked more about what their reasons were? Is that something you prefer to keep confidential?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Basically, it was a combination of like in the 1990s, there wasn't a heck of a lot of support systems available.
I see.
That were sort of specialized for the issue for the school system is the combination of you only have so many resources. And everyone is on a spectrum, right? Everyone has their slightly different needs and places where additional help would be helpful. And it's hard to craft a system around that with limited resources. And particularly in the 1990s when, a lot of this was still being figured out, and we didn't have quite the amount of research and language to understand this. So they went, well, we'll do the best we can, but like telling Justin won't particularly be helpful because there just isn't, a next step after that that's particularly helpful. And then the other one was, simply to just a little bit of stigma, right? They went, all right, well, us knowing this is helpful for, knowing when he, gets passionate about something, we're going to really enjoy that, indulge that and give all the resources, or when he doesn't quite understand things in a way that we expect a kid should, we can think about it this way. But we don't want to burden him with that, and the taunts and everything else that might come, which I fully understand. I don't know what decision I would have made in their situation. So,
that's fair.
I go the time that they told me, sort of, midway through university, I go, okay, well, maybe you could have told me a few years earlier, or you could have decided to wait a couple more years, or, in a couple more years, I might have figured it out myself, right? But it's interesting as an adult, having read a lot of people talking about their experiences of sort of, coming out as autistic in a sense, or realizing that they are autistic, and like everyone's story is different, but a lot of it, there's a lot of common denominators.
Oh yeah, very much so.
There wasn't a lot of knowledge. There was a lot of stigma. My parents did the best that they could, and then like how it comes out, it comes out in whatever random way.
And I think that there is still, like, from my experience in both secondary and elementary education, there is still a lot of stigma around people with autism, and I just from personal experience, not trying to come here, it's definitely still an uphill battle to try and like fit in amongst your peers. Like I'm going to be honest, I don't really interact with many people. I have one consistent friend, but other than that, I prefer to spend time on my own.
People are exhausting, but yeah, I mean, like it's it's better. It's still not great, right?
Oh yeah,
I think part of it is, people are better in terms of, not pointing and singling out in the same way to give you that immediate shame. But there's still the small slights that people will make all the time, or the inability to give grace or patience.
Oh yeah, and I, like you mentioned, with the lack of resources, I also did feel it a lot in the education system too. Like even today, there's not enough resources to go around to like make sure people are strongly equipped for the future. One of my colleagues, when I was at BCIT, actually, they did an investigative piece for BCIT News where the whole system of accessibility for post-secondary institutions, especially at BCIT, needs a complete ground-up overhaul. You can't just have something separate to accommodate to one person. You need to like rethink the entire educational system in those areas.
It's a challenge. If it was an easy fix, it would have been done, right?
Yeah.
But it's from a government level, on a politics level, we're constantly, as societies, making judgment calls on what supports we should give to what people and how much and why. And you look at some of those battles, particularly in Ontario, though they've happened in British Columbia in the last couple of years as well, when it came to the BC government's attempted reforms around hubs, right?
Yeah, I heard about that.
Where people are extremely passionate because it's their sense of self, or it's their sense over their child, and sort of everyone agrees that more needs to be done, but then it is the sticky thing of, well, what does that mean and what changes as a result?
And especially when a lot of these supports are what help people achieve a career that they find meaningful and want to pursue in the future. Which brings me to another question I have. How did autism impact your decision to go into journalism?
My parents told me that I had autism after I had been working for the campus newspaper for a year or so, and sort of at that point had fully fallen heads over heels with the idea of being a journalist. And once I learned that too, it's like, oh, there's overlaps that make sense. It's a lot of it's compiling of information. It's telling people about that information. It's my new special interest for the day is this thing. It's there's a focus on both accuracy, but also on morals, on right and wrong, right? The idea is to tell people accurately what has transpired, and when someone has has lied or done something deceitful, that is something that inherently makes me angry. And so you can, especially from a print format, when you're writing things down, right? And it's not about being able to immediately have the right response to something in the moment, right, based on, how people are going to react, but like having the time to think over, all right, this is how everything happened, and let me think through it and look at all the quotes and go, these are the most important things that transpired, and let me put it together in this package that makes it make sense for the general public. And so, there's a lot of things of how my brain works and the type of activities that is inherently pleasing to it that are helpful when it comes to a lot of the acts of journalism.
And the thing with journalism is that it's kind of a way to get the public to think about issues you want them to think about. Like, it's not really your opinion, but you do feel, but in a way it also is, because this issue is close to my heart. I'm bringing you the story because I think this issue should be also close to your hearts. Take it whichever way you please, but you got what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're the town crier, right? And you get that, opportunity and that privilege to tell people, hey, I spent a lot of time looking into this thing, and I think it's interesting, and I hope you find it interesting too. To get to do that on a different thing every single day, I think is also one of the great joys, right? And a way that sort of balances out some of the impulses sometimes that my brain can have, where I go, oh, I really love this one topic and I want to do more and more on it. But I also, you go, all right, but if you were to talk about the exact same thing for 62 days in a row, most people would probably get bored. Now, by the flip side, during a lot of people came to my work during the pandemic, where every single day I, would recap and analyze in real time the press conference from the provincial government about the daily case counts and hospitalizations and deaths, and quickly put together a lot of charts. And some people would be like, how, that must be exhausting. How can you do this every single day? And I go, well, I'm quite happy to have the exact same routine and talk about this one thing again and again and again. And in that case, it was the thing that everyone wanted to hear information about and get information on. And so my role was particularly helpful, and my skill set was particularly helpful for that time for telling that story.
Because compiling stats and sharing with the public, that's something you've been very well known for on Twitter, and that's something I take genuinely enjoy.
It's right in my wheelhouse, right?